they believe very much in the idea also of expansion, of going further west and conquering more territory. That would be an idea of a Democrat. A Whig believes in something different. A Whig, remember, represents the business interests of the wealthy in both the North and the South, but they also like to purport or advertise and discuss the harmony of society and the harmony in the values, the value of community. And they hate leaders whose self-interest fosters conflict amongst individuals. So they don't like people like Andrew Jackson who polarize citizens from one another. They're very much in favor of a renewed national bank. They're in favor of protective tariffs, internal improvements, public schools, and other type of moral reforms. Very much it would be a Whig policy. The Whigs tend to be more aristocratic and wealthier, whereas the Democrats tend to represent more of the common folk. Before we move on to the next administrations and what goes on in the United States politically during that period of time or internationally, I want to take a little bit of a step back and focus the next lecture, 2 or 3, on the other elements of U.S. history. First, we're going to begin by discussing the economy. We're going to discuss inventions. We're going to discuss immigration, stuff like that. Then we're going to move on to culture. And then after that, we're going to be discussing the plantation economy and life of slaves as well as life in the South. Okay? Basically, we're covering the periods from 1790 to 1860 by doing this. All right? So let's start talking about the economy, and not just economy, but let's start talking about the idea of the Western landscape. Okay? Because the United States has grown so much over the past couple of decades, there's a real pride of the immense amount of land the U.S. offers. And therefore, being a frontiersman is a very sexy and attractive idea. However, frontier life is rather tough. It's quite individualistic, too individualistic, quite superstitious in the sense that people are rather ill-informed. You don't know what you're going to get when you go out west, and there are lots of altercations between Indians and white men as people go out and try to settle further in the west. Okay? The United States is growing in terms of population. Okay? Population is doubling every 25 years. And by 1860, there are going to be 33 states in the United States, compared to 13 when it becomes the U.S. in 1789. Okay? The cities themselves, they're also developing. Yeah, they're developing, but I don't know if it's a place that you want to live at that particular point. Sanitation is awful. Just awful. If you are not a wealthy member of society, you have to deal with just, dead bodies on the street, no garbage collectors. It's awful, okay? Water quality is awful. The cities, they're growing, but, lifestyle and what we've come to accept about being, nice lifestyle has not caught up. Has not caught up just for yet, okay? Where is the population coming from? Why is the population booming so much? Well, it's because of the high birth rate. Americans at this time do have a very high birth rate. Not just slaves themselves, but also Americans are giving birth at high rates. But starting in the 1840s, immigration begins to increase. Before 1840s, the majority of immigrants came from, let's say, England still and around that particular area. Okay, but in the 1840s, two new groups come in rapid numbers. Okay, the 1840s is called the first wave of immigration. The first wave of immigration. Let's talk about these two groups that make up the first wave of immigration. The first are the Irish. The Irish and their condition in Ireland and its condition in the 1840s, it's not good. Okay, there is a fungus growing on Irish potatoes and it's causing massive famine and people want to leave. A massive exodus takes place out of Ireland, and many end up going to the shores of the United States because of the reputation that in America you could have 3 meals filled with meat every day. Again, the United States is beginning to develop a reputation for being a land where people with nothing can come and receive everything, receive a huge bounty. Okay? Let's talk about the Irish that come, though. What are some of their characteristics? First of all, they're Catholic. All right, remember, the majority of the United States, or Americans, are Protestants, right? All Calvinists, Anglicans, they're all part of Protestants. Protestant is, a name given to an immense amount of denominations of parts of the Christian religion that are not Catholic or Orthodox. Irish are Catholic. They're also unskilled. They speak English with a different accent. They don't have any money. They tend to be illiterate. Oh, goodness gracious. So where do the Irish end up going? Well, if you don't have any money and you're illiterate and, where do you go? Well, you go where you can get an unskilled job. Where are there unskilled jobs? Typically, those jobs are found in the cities. In cities like New York and Boston, really exponentially grow due to the Irish population. Irish come there in the hopes of receiving some type of factory job in order to make them quite stable. Unfortunately, when the Irish arrived, they were not beloved at all. There was a social welfare group called the Ancient Order of the Hibernians, Hiberians, that tried to assist the Irish as they moved to the U.S., but there was lots of discrimination going around. And we're going to talk about some of those elements a bit later. Okay? The Irish did suffer because they're Catholic, because they're uneducated, unskilled, because certain people thought the Irish were not bringing anything to the country. Future generations of the Irish immigrants that would come, the Irish gravitated towards certain industries. And those industries would be that of policing and politics. Over the next generations, by the late 19th century, early 20th century, there are many famous Irish politicians, as well as lots of policemen. Anyway, moving on. Second group. The second group who came over were a bit different. The Germans. The 1840s was sort of an unstable period in Germany, as there were many efforts to try to. Germany still wasn't a country, okay? Germany was just a variety of tribes and provinces and regions, each controlled by, a separate group, okay? But in the period of time in the 1840s, there were certain revolutions taking place. Lots of Germans came to the United States hoping to find some type of stability. Contrasting with the Irish, the Germans were better educated. They were literate. They also had more money. They couldn't necessarily speak English, but they had more money. So thus, when the Germans came to the United States, many of them bought land in the Midwest part of the United States, which is why states like Wisconsin, Missouri, Illinois, etc. have large German populations. That's where they went. They couldn't necessarily exist in the cities where language is a big deal, okay, but they could exist in farming. And that's where they went out to, farming. All right, and lots of Germans became farmers around that area. Germans brought many cultural things to the United States. Germans brought beer to the United States. Germans brought Christmas tree to the United States, and the idea of kindergarten. Yes, that's a German word, obviously. So that's the Germans, the German 48ers as their reference, the German 48ers. Germans are also, as I said, very pro-public education, and they are definitely enemies of slavery. Finally, we talked about these two immigrant groups that came. Let's talk about the people who don't like them. The people who don't like them are called the nativists. The nativists. The nativists end up forming their own political party called the American Party. Often, the nativists or members of the American Party would get into violent confrontations with immigrants. Thus, when a policeman would ask a suspicious-looking youth of where these people, these nativists are, where they're meeting, where their meeting houses are, the youth would go, "I know nothing," hence their nickname. And this will be on tests, know-nothings. Know-nothings, K-N-O-W, know-nothings, are nativists, anti-foreigners, part of the American Party. Okay? And that type of fervor only grows as the numbers of immigrants increase. All right then, that brings us to the end of today's lecture. Next time we'll continue this discussion talking about inventions, and we're going to get into culture as well. But right now let's talk about the homework. And the assignment for this lecture is the following. Compare and contrast the experiences of two immigrant groups, the Irish and the Germans, in the 1840s and the 1850s. It's just what I talked about. Hopefully you remember. Compare and contrast the experiences of two immigrant groups, the Irish and the Germans, in the 1840s and 1850s. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you learned something, and I will see you next lecture. Goodbye.